Prior to moving down to the Cape 2 years ago, I was in practice for 39 years at UMass Medical Center in Worcester. I was an assistant professor of orthopedics and a member of the trauma center, the level 1 trauma center at UMass Memorial. With that as background, I'd like to address a couple of the health and safety issues that we're concerned about. As a little plug for our beloved Dowses Beach, can we bring that up? Okay. We're actually trying to bring up the same picture that's at the back of the hall. Dowses Beach is a peninsula surrounded on 3 sides. You can see the beach obviously to the left, sand dunes, and then a large parking lot. What makes things even more complicated, and I have another view of the causeway that I'll bring up, but in the background, you can see that the only access to Dowses Beach is by way of a narrow causeway that runs between Finney's Bay and East Bay. That makes Dowses a potential disaster waiting to happen. Although the cables will run, three large cables would run approximately 30 to 40 feet beneath the beach and beneath the dunes, but then they need to come up into the parking lot, and they would be located about 5 feet below the asphalt of the parking lot. There would be 3 vaults giving Avangrid access to those cables. If a fire, well, and I should start. Cliff did a good job of explaining this, reviewing this. There are over 600 accidents per year in the United States related to fires or explosions involving electrical cables. So we're not talking about something rare. If an explosion were to occur in that parking lot, it could be catastrophic. How can I get my next slide up here? This is a view from the other end of the beach. This is the causeway with water on either side. It's a narrow two-lane road. It is the only access to the beach. If a fire or explosion were to occur and blocked access to that causeway, first responders may be unable to get to casualties on the beach and the parking lot for any length of time. That is it's a perfect storm waiting to happen. The second issue that I'd like to discuss, and Dr. Conway will be following me with more detailed information regarding EMF. But let me give you a very quick physics lesson. EMF, electromagnetic fields, is a term that describes 2 components: electrical fields and magnetic fields. Avangrid likes to boast about how their cables that are located 5 feet below the parking lot and the 6 miles of roadways between the parking lot and the substations. They like to tell us that there's no risk with EMF because the cables are going to be encased in concrete vaults, and then you're also going to have 5 feet of dirt and asphalt above them. Electrical fields are well shielded by those materials. However, magnetic fields, which continue to be a health concern, are not shielded by any physical materials. That means that anybody at the beach, anybody walking along our 6 miles to the substations will be only 5 feet from the magnetic waves generated by those cables. All the studies in the United States related to EMF risks have been in regard to overhead cables, which are located 40, 50, 60 feet overhead. Radiation risks are related to distance. Being located 5 feet from people walking along the parking lot and beach is a far cry from what happens with electrical cables 40 or 50 feet overhead. Finally, perhaps the greatest risk to the Cape is what could happen to the sole source aquifer, because that would affect virtually everybody on Cape Cod. And that, I believe, is what makes this project most unacceptable. As a quick discussion of risk, in the medical world, we talk about risk as having two components. Number one is, what's the likelihood or probability of something adverse happening? And Avangrid has reassured us that those risks are very low because of their mitigation efforts. However, the other component of risk that Avangrid cannot control is, what's the magnitude of the event if it does occur? With what could happen to the aquifer, the catastrophic effect is so great that it outweighs any mitigation efforts that Avangrid can propose. And because of that, we feel that this is an unacceptable risk. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Is that okay? My name is Dr. Joseph Conway. I'm an obstetrician, gynecologist. I've lived in Centerville and Osterville for the last 45 years. I have been chief of staff at Cape Cod Hospital, and I've served on the board of directors of Cape Cod Healthcare. I've delivered about 6,000 of our best citizens here on the Cape. I am a concerned citizen who feels we have an obligation to protect and preserve the fragile land, beaches, and waters of Massachusetts' leading tourist and economic diamond. Our health, safety, and protection of our drinking water is at risk. Whether you believe in the obsolete wind farm technology or not, the convenient landing place for a foreign company's money-making project backed by the country of Qatar is clearly the wrong place and wrought with dangers to our environment, our beaches and bays, our drinking water, our villages, businesses, and health. I wish to address three aspects and concerns of these projects. First, the concerns of generated electromagnetic fields of these high to extra high voltage transmission cables as they are rated. Secondly, the dangers to our sole source aquifer, which provides, again, as you've heard, 1,000% or 100% of our Upper Cape's drinking water. And finally, the dangers of the cables themselves and their thermal effects, both on the seabed environment and to the sole source aquifer over which these cables are proposed to pass. This could lead to increasing the temperature of the aquifer and subsequently increasing bacterial counts and increased gastrointestinal diseases. The devil is in the details when it comes to the impact of these construction projects. The proponents have not produced any scientific independent studies to allay our concerns of the dangers or disruptions to our community and environment. They have not presented any plans for continued future monitoring, nor their plans to mitigate problems that are discovered. Electromagnetic fields are produced by the flow of electrons through these transmission cables. The strength of the electromagnetic fields are proportional to the amount of electrical current passing through the power line. and exposure is proportional, as we've said, to the distance from the cables. The International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection guidelines point out that power lines are similar voltage to those of the wind farm. They produce approximately 10,000 to 100,000 greater exposure than a cell phone or a microwave. These are not comparable items. These effects have been shown by Gauss meters to be above acceptable values of 0.5 Gauss within 100 yards of the source. A transmission cable of which is proposed up to 765 kilovolts can produce 10 kilovolts per meter, much, much greater than what is acceptable. The World Health Organization of the United Nations classifies electromagnetic fields of radiation as possible carcinogenic to humans on limited evidence, but showing association with childhood leukemia from a study in Colorado. Continued research is ongoing in this field. There is also a superficial link to glioma brain tumors. Microwaves and radios produce waves that are dissimilar frequency and amplitude. Please, Avangrid, stop telling us that they are comparable. Other studies have shown a 4.4 times greater chance of infertility for women living within 500 meters of a 63 to 400 kilovolt cables. The proposed cables, as we know, are 220 to 275 kilovolts each. Prematurity and low birth weights have also been noted. Cataracts have increased in chronically exposed workers. The Mass Department of Public Health Radiation Control Division should be asked to render a safety statement on the proximity of these cables 5 feet below the surface to our health. They are not, as just stated, 50 feet in the air. The second area of concern is our drinking water preservation. I will review the location and structure of our sole source, which actually has already been done, for over half of the Cape's residents. The major aquifer, by far of the 6 that exists on the Cape, can easily be disrupted and contaminated by the trenching for these 6 landing cables and proposed 12 connection cables. The Cape aquifers provide 100% of our drinking water. The major and largest aquifer is the Sagamore lens of the upper half of the Cape Cod, as we've just been shown. The highly permeable land of the Cape keeps these aquifers recharged, but also makes it highly susceptible to contamination. Our aquifer is recharged solely by our rainfall. The aquifer is described as a lens, and in fact, it is shaped like a lens. It's quite thin at the edges, which are the boundaries of Cape Cod Bay and Nantucket Sound. It also extends under the shoreline and beyond the shoreline and lies only 10 to 20 feet beneath the seabed. The aquifer at its center, which is in the mid-Cape elevated area of the Cape, is deeper in shape and above sea level, which is surprising. It has an upper freshwater layer and a lower saltwater layer. These are in equilibrium, and there is a diffusion layer of the salt at the thin edges of the lens at the southern and northern beaches. Thus, there is a great danger to puncture the aquifer and allow intrusion of more salt water into the aquifer with the horizontal drilling, which is done for out to about 1,000 yards from the beach. The drilling is approximately 30 feet below the seabed and rises to about 10 feet under the beach. This creates a huge danger for intrusion into the aquifer, not to mention the 230,000 volts of electricity, 10 to 15 feet beneath your grandchildren who are building sandcastles. Perhaps we will tan faster this summer. This choice of landfall for these cables is crazy and totally illogical. Intrusion into the aquifer would decrease the fresh water available, raise the sodium levels, and raise the chlorine levels. It will also raise acidity, iron, manganese, and hydrogen sulfide. I highly suspect that the transitional zone of the aquifer was pierced at Covell's Beach, as pictures of in the production and construction clearly show the many, many pumps they had to use to keep water out of the exit points of the cables, which are up into the parking lot and the splicing boxes beneath the parking lot. Also, the routes proposed for the cables will transect two zones, which are a one wellhead protection area, as well as two extended incursions into the very large Zone 2 wellhead protection areas. Other projected routes transect one Zone 1 and two Zone 2 areas, which have sort of been shown to us already. Contamination through our unconsolidated, highly permeable land of Cape Cod by dielectric cooling fluids, hydraulic fluids, diesel fluids, gasoline, and oil would be catastrophic, as we've said. We have no alternatives available for drinking water. Plymouth County does not have the capacity to supply the Cape, nor does it have the means by any pipelines to help us if there's any disasters. We have no desalination plants that are up and running for backup protection, and desalination is extremely expensive. Perhaps Avangrid should be building 2 or 3 desalination plants rather than electrical substations to guarantee our drinking water. Finally, I will discuss the dangers of temperature increases to both the seabed and the land from these high voltage cables. I will cite the proven references, not imagined, non-proven wishful thinking of Avangrid. In an August 2016 Geophysical Journal International studied the temperature effects of high voltage transmission cables in sedimentary environments, exactly what the Cape is made up of. This was done at the University of Southampton in the UK. In the study, heat flow regimes and radial temperature distributions were assessed. Surface temperatures of the cables, as was somewhat mentioned, rise to 170 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is for a distance of greater than a meter were found when these cables are in operation. Significant implications were found for chemical and physical processes, biological changes, and operational performance of the cables themselves. Heat transport would have significant implications on the seabed microfauna and the cable current ratings as well. Little is known of the thermal regimes they will generate when operating. Heat loss was found to be both by conduction and at higher temperatures, which these are, by convection. As several marine organisms are extremely sensitive to minor ambient temperature changes, any such temperature increases in the surrounding sediment may cause significant impacts and displacement of living organisms dwelling near these surface environments. There is also potential for geochemical changes as well. So say goodbye to shellfish and lobsters. Cables laid in terrestrial environments are much different from seabed marine cables and their ability to carry current. Calculations are not comparable, as Avangrid keeps claiming. In low permeability cable surrounds, heat transfer is at least 40 centimeters, and at high temperatures are achieved, it changes to convection heating, which then can extend as far as 5 feet from the cables. In high permeability seabed areas, heat effects extend up to 5 feet. Study commented that the operating temperatures of the typical submarine cables in its current flow easily exceeds the German Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency's guidelines, which was referred to earlier. Okay. This allows production of no higher than 36 degrees Fahrenheit, approximately 20 centimeters from the cables. This is much, much lower than what is produced by the Vineyard Wind and other proposed cable voltages. Again, we have no documented testing from Avangrid. The study went on to say that temperature change is an important and long-recognized environmental factor in the ecosystems of the benthic biota. These thermal increases can impact evolutionary, physiological, and behavioral responses, as well as impact their geographical distributions. Excessive sediment temperatures can initiate significant seabed changes, exposing cables and possible changes to the cables themselves, fishing, and watercraft. In addition to thermal effects to the sea environment, we then move to the thermal effects on land, and more specifically, the cable thermal effects only a few feet from our sole aquifer. In December 7th, 2023, New England Journal of Medicine, a very timely study from Yale University delineated the tremendous effects of just a 1 to 3 degree change in the source of our drinking water. Certain bacteria, namely Shigella, Salmonella, Legionnaire's disease, Giardia, and certain viral and protozoan species, are very sensitive to thermal changes. Most of these organisms can cause severe gastrointestinal disease. Placing these cables over any water source, especially anywhere that has only a sole source aquifer, is madness. Are we ready to handle additional water purification, greater chlorination? Who will be able to handle increased monitoring, and who will pay for it? In summary, I've discussed the three problems with landing these high voltage cables on the beaches and routing them 5 feet beneath the surface in residential areas and above our aquifer. First, the dangers of very strong electromagnetic fields for which there are no plans for monitoring, let alone the known possible effects. 2, the fragile sole source aquifer on which we all depend and which we must vigorously and diligently guard and preserve. And lastly, the thermal effects both to the seabed and on the land. There is little data and again, no plan for monitoring and guarding the environment